belooft wat. Tim, where are you? Oh, there you are. I'm introducing you, Tim, but you can come here. It's okay. So Tim, how do we call you? A biohacker, I would say. Yeah. You're the co-founder of Grindhouse Wetware. We know each other for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And what, you're a grinder, a person, a body hacker, a cyborg even, I would say. One of the people that are for a longer time into this new thing of applying technology to the human body. You're always experimenting on yourself, so I'm anxious to know what's the latest that you're doing. But also I want to emphasize that it's really a philosophy. It's not like you're a gadget grabber or something, but there's a truly belief and ideology that you can make the world better. People will get better if they apply more technology to themselves. And I would like to invite you to explain to us why and how it works.
Excellent.
Thanks, Tim.
All right. Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope the conference is going well so far. I hope it stays going well after this. As he said, my name's Tim Cannon, and I'm a software engineer and a biohacker. And about 6 years ago, I took a deep dive into the world of biohacking. And basically, this was the sort of thing where I found out that people were implanting magnets into themselves in order to feel electromagnetic fields. And I thought that this was extremely fascinating. I grew up kind of reading science fiction, particularly cyberpunk as a genre. And cyberpunk tends to focus on a time when man and machine are merging. And the idea of being able to sense something far beyond the realm of normal human sensory perception was extremely fascinating to me. And I just basically kind of dove in head first. And so I had read an article about this magnet implantation in April, and by May, I had implanted a magnet in my finger. And I began to sense all of the new things and these new experiences, and I became aware that there was a whole world around me that I was constantly being bathed in that I was completely unaware of prior to this sort of thing. And so we started to do projects to make some more functional implants and build and design these things. I'll show you some of that now. This is a picture of me with my magnet kind of holding up another device and illustrating that it's there and has magnetic pull. You can also, again, feel live wires behind walls, all sorts of other things. Now, for those of you who might be sort of squeamish, this next slide might be a little bit troublesome. But then, after doing the first Sogeti conference that I went to, I implanted a fairly large implant. Yeah, I get that reaction a lot. As you can see, it has some LEDs behind it, and it was taking my temperature once every 5 seconds, kicking it out over Bluetooth, and I was able to monitor my body temperature. We built a thermostat at my house to say when I got cold, it would heat my house up, and when I got warm, it would cool it down. Unfortunately, it didn't work very well, and every time I went out for a cigarette, my girlfriend got mad because the house would get really hot. Yeah, so, and again, this kind of highlights why we do this self-experimentation, because the concepts of usability here are a completely verdant field for exploration. So, when I got this magnet implanted, it didn't take very long. Once the novelty kind of wore off, I started to build devices to talk to the magnet. I built a little rangefinder thing that would let me feel through my magnet when things were getting closer and further away from this device. And so I'd be able to pick it up and walk around the room with my eyes closed, using only my magnet as my only sensory organ to navigate the world. But what was interesting was I was struck with a sense of blindness. And so it really bothered me, not really knowing that I was being exposed to these sorts of things and that sort of stuff. Now, we continued on and built some more extensive implants. This is somebody who implanted our lightable LED implant into his chest, and then that's me and another person that works with me. So this is the sort of thing that I'm interested in. Now, the brain is a pattern recognition device, and it looks at things that repeat over and over again, and then uses them to make predictions about the world in which we live. And from my perspective, the more data, the better, and the more data we have, the better we can navigate the world and solve the problems that we find ourselves facing in the modern world, and given the accelerating rate of technology. And so I started to kind of get this impression that maybe we should be looking at the human being as an animal with predictable behaviors, and that kind of gave me some insight into how best I feel we should be moving forward, which again is to merge man with his technology rather than letting technology leave us behind or run rampant. So the philosophers that talk about the dangers and the ethical problems, I think that they tend to be stuck in this sort of fear-mongering state where they say we should pump the brakes, we should not be doing this, we should really slow down, and an overarching question of, is it even ethical to use technology in this way? But I'd like to take this from a very, very different perspective. I think we have a moral imperative to re-engineer the human being, and I will explain why. Basically, we believe that we tend to have a cultural acceptance that human beings stopped evolving from the neck up. But the fact is our brains are pre-biased. They're biased towards various behaviors that have very little to do with the world that we live in now. We're constantly being tricked by our own brain into behaving in certain ways, and then we don't really understand exactly why we did it. And then our brain gives us this sort of feeling like, well, it was your choice, and then it makes a bunch of really weird rationalizations. And I don't really understand why people are so enamored with staying in the natural state that we're in. I believe that all environments, including the planet, have a load-bearing capacity for life and progress and technology and these sorts of things. I think we may have overshot ours by many-fold. And this has me very concerned because we have extremely advanced technology, but we are effectively the same thing that we were in the Ice Age. And a lot of times around my lab, we make the joke that you shouldn't teach monkeys to use guns. It's just a really bad idea because they will come out of the jungle and they'll shoot you. So we are basically monkeys with high-tech digital fiber optic cable. And that is not necessarily good because it takes 2,000 calories just to sit on our lazy asses and make snarky comments on the internet. And I think that that's kind of a waste. So one example that I tend to give is that a study that was repeated many times over showed that if you're handed a warm beverage, you are more inclined to trust someone. Well, salesmen figured this out and, of course, now use it to make you more pliable to the techniques of sales. Now, we can think of really great evolutionary reasons that this behavior would have arisen. However, in the modern context, we find that it is a direct window to exploiting us. And interestingly, that exploitation is something that we've tried to we've acknowledged, but only in a backdoor sort of way. So in America, at least, we have a law that says any major purchase that you make, you have 3 days to take it back. Now, what's weird is we all think we're all making our own decisions, but we have this law that basically says if you were somehow spellbound by this sort of salesman's tactic, well, in that case, you have to be protected from yourself and your own decisions. Another really great example of this is blood sugar. So let's picture an example of a man who maybe has skipped breakfast and lunch, and he comes home, and normally he would be happy to hear the laughter and jubilance of his children, but today he comes home and he yells at his children. And he can't really figure out why, when he finally has had his dinner, why was he so upset? Well, the fact is, if you think about the Ice Age, if your blood sugar dips low, you should be primed for aggression because chances are you're going to have to wrestle something to the ground, kill it with your bare hands, and then eat it raw. That requires a pretty heavy amount of aggression. And this is something that we need to be worried about because we have all of these vestigial behaviors that are running around, and in the context of the modern world, they're no longer helpful, and nor are they necessarily useful to moving along. And we do this with all sorts of, we understand that all sorts of behaviors have natural inclinations. We know that people can be mathematically gifted. We know that people can be athletically gifted. But we don't really think about people as having talent in the domain of self-control. We don't consider people to be moral or philosophical geniuses. However, I think that this is a really big thing. It is understanding that not everyone has the same level of self-control. And so when you start to look at how other people are tortured by their own weakness, they can't figure out why they can't, say, diet or quit smoking, which is certainly my case. These are the things that in the modern world, we see these examples of people with heavy amounts of self-control, and we can't figure out why we can't get there. And that's the average person. The average person will have self-control issues. So the thing is that self-control is actually not good for biological life. It's not a property that biological life should have. If you are the type of person who would have skipped a meal on the African savanna, chances are you were not going to make it. Because the thing was, nature was delimiting you. Nature provided all the famine and death and war that we could ever use to make sure that as long as we were gluttonous and as long as we chased after food and sex and didn't share with people who didn't look like us and shared with people who did, we would survive. And in the modern context, this just doesn't make sense. And it ends up causing all kinds of problems. So I think right now, staying the way we are and desiring to stay the way we are is basically betting our future on the idea that people, the average person, can talk themselves out of gluttony and greed and bigotry and hunger and these sorts of things. And it is not the case. We can't talk ourselves out of what we are. We can't think ourselves into a better animal because we are bound by genetics and we are bound by evolution. And evolution simply is not moving as fast as technology. And we have different programs of behavior that are in competition. So we have a behavioral program that is to avoid being taken advantage of. And so that when we do our part, we say, okay, I nailed it. I'm not going to do everybody else's part. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to recycle. I might, casually judge other people for not recycling, but I'm not going to do more because I don't want to be taken advantage of. And in the meantime, other people are saying, I don't have the time. I don't feel like it. I don't want to lose weight and this sort of thing. And so these two things are in competition. You have people patting themselves on the back because of their excellent self-control, and then you have people completely subject to their natural whims. And the thing is, the individual is invisible in the context of the whole. And the law of averages will march on. So biology being based on struggle, and given that we don't struggle in the same ways, is absolutely going the wrong direction. And the way in which we've come to the place we are now is basically bumping into each other randomly based on local area and then breeding with each other because of traits that have nothing to do with moving towards a better future. So if you consider the case of one of the examples that I really love to give is the case of libido. So our libido is currently set to Ice Age, right? And so we're actually trying to outbreed glaciers that no longer exist. We're trying to outbreed infant mortality rates of 25% that took the mother with it half the time, and then also that we could die of a tooth infection in our mid-30s, right? That's what our libido is set to, and then people are like, why is the world so overpopulated? I mean, because we love sex. And every time, and it would be impossible. Like, I would love to just break into the room right before somebody was about to get to business and go, do you really want to do this, or is this nature? Because I'm pretty sure they'd say, Oh, no, I want to do this. It's me. Yeah, I want it. So I think that this is kind of an interesting thing. Now, if we were to have some kind of advantage that was exponentially compounding in nature, for a while, it would be really difficult to see. The human brain doesn't really process exponential growth very well. We do linear growth really well. We have trouble with exponential growth. And so if you had something that was an advantage of your species that managed to exponentially grow, for the first piece of it, you wouldn't really notice. You would feel like you were subject to the same things as the rest of the natural world, disease, famine, war, and what have you. However, in the blink of an eye, the elbow effect of exponential growth would make it clear as day that there was a humongous advantage. Now, this is exactly what technology is. Technology is a exponentially accelerating advantage that is now only becoming clear to us exactly how much of an advantage it is and how quickly it's going to grow. And the thing is, life is designed for robustness. Biological life is designed for robustness. See, if we lost all of modernity tomorrow, right, and all of electricity was gone, our knowledge was disappeared overnight, well, the thing is, we would probably survive because we still want to have sex, we still get hungry, and we still want to keep things from people who don't look like us and give things, share things to people who are in the in-group. In and out-group thinking is one of those things. So why I suggest that we re-engineer the human being, and that's not just the body, that's the brain, right? I think people separate them, but they don't understand that they're subject to various things in the brain that are standard for mammals, right? But don't really have much of an effect on our modern life. But how can we expect to have world peace when we're all one skipped meal away from punching each other in the face? You know? How can we expect to have racial equality when your brain creates implicit bias? And make no mistake, this is not an accident that the brain does this. If you're on the African savanna, a great evolutionary behavioral strategy is racism. Racism is an evolutionary strategy for figuring out who you should share your resources with. This should make everybody extremely uncomfortable. This is why no matter how benevolent you are, if you take the racial bias test, you will fail. This is troublesome. Now, I think that we need to stop pretending that the human being is at the pinnacle of evolution. I think we need to stop patting ourselves on the back and looking at our culture for all of the great things it did. And I'm very happy that our cultures have done amazing things. I love art and I love math, and I'm absolutely in absolute love with science. It's one of my favorite pursuits, and every day I get to be fascinated. But we can't judge our world based on only the highlights of what we've done. And if you look at the world and the way it behaves, what you see from a distance, when you look at it from a distance, you see that we are effectively animals scratching around in the dirt. And that should be discomforting to anyone. And the fact is, nature doesn't care if we survive. Nature doesn't care about biological life at all. If it burns out, it's no problem. Right? We are an invasive species. And that is not our fault, but it is our problem. And we have to solve that. There's a great quote by George Carlin that says, "The earth does not care about plastic. The earth will strike a new balance, the earth with plastic." And this is exactly what has me worried, is that we are going to end up burning ourselves out, all the while thinking that nature really wants us to be smarter and better, and nature really wants these things. Nature does not care about us. Now, we tend to care about nature. And so if we want to save our environments and our ecosystems and ourselves, I believe that we have a moral imperative to the future to re-engineer the human into something that can behave better. Now, there's a science educator in America named Bill Nye the Science Guy. Anybody familiar with Bill Nye? He is very concerned about the environment. And he said, he has this analogy where he says, if you're in a car careening towards a cliff, you pump the brakes. And I think that that's true from that perspective, but that's not the analogy that I think is accurate. I think a better analogy would be a plane. If you're in a plane careening towards a cliff, there will be a point where you lose the ability to brake. However, if you accelerate, you will be able to achieve the velocity needed to fly. Now, I don't know if we have passed the point of braking, but I do know that what I would prefer to see in humanity is to fly. Thank you.
Okay, Tim.
Do you have questions?
Yeah, a few questions. Yes, so do you have stuff in your body now?
Yeah. I have a RFID here that gets me into my hacker space at home.
Yeah.
So if I just put my hand up to the door opens for me. I have an XNT chip here that holds the GPS coordinates to my lab, so I can swipe my phone and it'll start my navigator and just start heading me there. I have several magnets implanted. I have one in my tragus that you can bombard and you can hear sounds and that sort of thing. So it uses bone conduction and kind of allows me to hear music inside my head and this sort of thing. It was really cool. The first sound that I got to hear through bone conduction was NWA, Straight Outta Compton. It's awesome. I also had a number of implants, as you saw up there. I had the original North Star in my hand. However, I had that removed to make room for another one that we're actually going to be putting out. It's a pretty interesting one.
What does it?
So it's basically, it has a bunch of sensors in it, and it uses the phone to recognize gestures. And so you can tap it and it'll start to glow, and as the glow dims out, you have that much time to do a gesture. And then using machine learning, you can teach it a bunch of patterns and then have it kick off whatever behavior you want. So for example, you'd be able to tap it and go like this, and an Uber would come and take you home or whatever.
Sure. So, what happens if you enter a plane?
I get this question a lot. When I did that huge one that made everybody in the audience kind of go, oh, Jesus, what are we listening to? Everybody said, well, how are you going to get through airport security? How are you going to get through airport security? So I'm leaving Dusseldorf Airport, and now when I entered the country, I did not have a giant box in my arm. And when I was leaving the country, I totally had a giant box in my arm. And I went to the airport, and I put my arms up like this, and I saw somebody go. And a colleague comes over and goes, no, just let him go. So, if there's any doubt, it's all security theater, just so you know.
Did they check whether it was a Samsung that you had in your arm?
Yeah, right. Yeah, don't want anything blowing up on the plane, right? Yeah.
So from the transhumanism, I mean, I talked with you, I think 5 years ago or something. Mm-hmm. So has anything changed in between? Are still people perceiving you and your friends as the crazy guys, or is it more accepted now?
Well, I think 5 years ago we were crazy to everyone, including really far out academics and that sort of thing. So only the most forward-thinking people were people who were interested in transhumanism were there. But I think now the academic community is starting to kind of understand what it is that we're saying. However, I think the average person, particularly religious people, are made extremely uncomfortable with, the extreme religious people are extremely uncomfortable with what we're doing because we're tinkering with, God's work and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. And last question, because you gave me the example yesterday when we talked about your friend in Germany. Can you? I think it's interesting because of the ownership of the data. Can you explain what he did and what situation?
This is a big piece of what we do. We call ourselves biohackers partly because we relate very heavily to the hacking community. We want to do a lot of this stuff open source. The device that I said allowed me to navigate around the room, we released that technology open source. We released the source code. And the reason that started me to think about this was I met a guy named Enno Park in Berlin, and he had cochlear implants, and he found out that the implant itself could receive ultra high frequencies, and so, but there's a software limit on it. And so he kind of said, hey, there are all these bats in Berlin at night, and what I'd love to know is if they're singing a song similar to the morning birds. And so what I want you to do is remove this software limitation on my hearing. And keep in mind, this was a man who was deaf for 30 or 40 years, right? And they said, oh, we're not going to remove that. We're not going to do that. And he said, well, what if I get a couple of hackers that I know to do it? And they said, well, then you will void your warranty and we'll never help you fix it again and all this other stuff. And he said, but isn't it my hearing? Shouldn't I be allowed to do anything I want with my hearing? Who owns my hearing? Because it must not be me. And that is something that we really do need to focus on, is body autonomy. That's what I focus on, is that I believe that we should all have the freedom to be whatever we want in a very literal sense. And I think it's concerning when we have people saying, oh yeah, you have a heart rate monitor, it's kicking out this data, could be useful to you, but you're not allowed to have it. That's ridiculous, that's absurd. It's your heart. And just because it has some company logo on it doesn't make it not your heart, because if you lost it, you'd know. You know, so. Well, only for a short time, you'd know.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Tim, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you.
Oh.